All right. Subject is personal responsibility as a post-partisan coalition. That's a new term I just came up with for all of these lines I'm drawing that I see as going across both sides of the political aisle instead of just being on one side or the other. So this one is personal responsibility as a theme. So obviously this theme is usually associated more with the political right. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to start with the political right. Generally speaking, when the right has a focus on personal responsibility, they're talking about things like meritocracy in the economy. People who work hard deserve to make more money. People who work less hard deserve to have less money. It's an incentive structure that encourages you to work harder. And they generally also encourage it socially and interpersonally. They don't like lazy people. Don't like people who aren't working hard. Why? Well, because you have a sort of a moral responsibility to contribute to your broader society, because it can't function without us working. So they impose that on individuals by disliking lazy people. They also care about personal responsibility for things like physical fitness. Health seems to be pretty right-wing coded these days, which is fucked up because it's a good thing to do to be healthy, right? Like just generally exercising and eating good food, generally good things to do as a person. Shouldn't be a controversial political statement, that one. But it's mostly the right that has this emphasis on personal responsibility on that front. They also seem to bring personal responsibility into a lot of their moral and religious politics. Take, for example, abortion, right? On that front, their position is that you have a moral responsibility to that child. It doesn't really matter how you ended up. And that's something that's a big emphasis for them. It does not matter what society does. It doesn't matter how you were raised. It doesn't matter, any of the things that brought you to this moment or where you are right now. All that matters is your reaction to it. And you can see this in like inspirational quotes and stuff. You're not responsible for everything. You're not responsible for what happens to you, but you are responsible for how you react to it. I think you can hear already, I don't take this idea very seriously. But we'll get into that in a minute. So for them, you can control your reaction to the situation. So for them, theoretically, it shouldn't even matter if the reason you're pregnant is like that you were raped or something like that. Most people get uncomfortable and sort of shift positions when the conversation turns to the whole exceptions for rape and incest thing. But I think on a fundamental principles level, logically, they should adhere to their position still and say that no, once it has happened that you have been raped, and I know I'm speaking a little loosely here, but you kind of got to with subjects like this. Once it has happened, now you are pregnant, now you're responsible for how you react to that situation. You're responsible for what you do with the life inside you. And they would argue that murdering it is still bad. So that's personal responsibility on the right. You can see it also going across the left too, though. But of course the left tends to have less of a focus on self-responsibility, right? Tends to have less of a focus on meritocracy, less of a focus on fitness and exercise, really anything that involves you improving yourself individually through your personal responsibility. They're more interested in the broader societal ethical commitments that we have. So this could be stuff like a responsibility to protest, bad things in the world, a responsibility to have a civic duty, ethical consumerism, a responsibility to pay attention to what you buy and what you eat, responsibility for who you associate with and who you talk to, responsibility for your platform, social responsibility for the impact your platform puts out into the world. That's the kind of responsibility they're interested in. You could also see responsibility for the poor, empathetic responsibility. That's really their sort of priority. So you can imagine, hypothetically, a person for whom the most important thing is personal responsibility, seeing this line that I'm seeing and becoming a pro-life, pro-ethical consumerism, exercise guru or something, right? You can see a version of a person for whom personal responsibility is everything. And I think a lot of principled old hat conservatives, maybe not the people who make up the majority of the Republican base today, but a lot of people back in the day, that was a large part of what conservatism was. It was taking on those kinds of responsibilities. Even things like not having casual sex, at least at that time, was a type of responsibility. Not drinking too much, not doing drugs, not gambling your spending away, not being greedy or lustful, all those 7 deadly sins. All of that was more or less a kind of moral responsibility that they were taking on. So you can imagine then the opposite as well. But you don't have to imagine it. It's me. I'm the opposite. I hate moral responsibility. I hate personal responsibility. I think it's fucking evil. I think it's a curse upon society. And I see a cross-partisan thing to criticize in personal responsibility. I see something on both sides of the political aisle that deserves criticism. So, abortion is probably the best issue to use here to get the left to get what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start with that, because I think the case for the left is going to be harder than the case for the right. It usually is. When it comes to abortion, most of the arguments that have been common for the longest while have been arguments about things like, is a fetus a full person deserving of the same sort of moral evaluations as an animal or a full baby? That's been one of the big considerations. Or the health of the mother. Is the health of the mother threatened? There's been an attempt to talk about abortion solely in language relating to health care in order to emphasize the health of the mother. The problem with this is that it does not work against a pro-lifer for whom abortion is a philosophical, moral issue. It doesn't work, because all they'll do is they'll say, oh, okay, a fetus isn't quite a full person. How late in development do they become a full person? Right? Let's find that line. And then, of course, there isn't one. There is no thick black line, at which point you reach a development where you have moral consideration and moral worth. You can't do that. And then they'll look at healthcare, and they'll see the same sort of, okay, well, when does it threaten the life of the mother, and when does it not? Right? We can just carve out exceptions for that. It's banned unless it's definitely going to kill the mother. See? How easy was that? So, it doesn't work. Those arguments are terrible. And I think we should stop repeating them so much. I don't think they convince anyone out of that mentality, because the mentality they're in is one of thick moral responsibility and trying to find specific ways to alleviate that doesn't work. They just carve out exceptions for them and then continue holding the same position fundamentally. you have to water down their belief in moral responsibility in order to win the argument. There is no other way, in my opinion. So, what does that look like? Well, the most popular form of a sort of anti-moral responsibility pro-choice argument is the violinist thought experiment. In the violinist thought experiment, there is a full-grown adult who can only survive with some sort of a kidney transfusion or something from this other adult woman. And this woman is strapped to this man who is a violinist, hence the name of the experiment. And if she ever unlatches the kidney transfusion device or whatever, he dies. So now she's in a situation where, through no consent of her own, because in this scenario it just kind of happens one day, she is stuck being responsible for this other man's life, and her life is now weighed down by his existence. And she's stuck having to keep him alive, even if it means sacrificing her whole life and existence. And it's clear why this thought experiment was come up with, right? I think the goal was to do away with the fetus aspect of abortion by making this a full-grown adult man worthy of moral consideration. And it also does away with the health of the mother portion, because she's gonna be fine. She's gonna be fine no matter what in this scenario. She's gonna be alive, at least. She's just going to be physically strapped to this other human being for however long it takes for him to complete his concerto or what have you, before then he can freely pass on. And so it begs you to ask the question, does she really have to care for this guy? Does she owe him every bit of comfort of her life? And the answer it gives is no, obviously, because it's a pro-choice argument. It's supposed to make you feel the depth of the loss of being forced to carry a child to term, the depth of what you lose from your life to do that. And there have been, there was a theatrical sort of an adaptation done by the YouTuber PhilosophyTube a while back, and it doesn't end with an argument. It doesn't end with PhilosophyTube like putting the nail in the head of like, here's the argument as to why the pro-choice people are right. No, it ends with an emotional crescendo where he says people die all the time, people are constantly dying. Why should I have to put my whole life on the line for this guy? That's what it ends with. An emotional appeal to how hard the weight of this moral responsibility is. That's it at the end of the day. That's what the pro-choice argument comes down to, I think. And I think it's at its strongest when people lean into that. There's this idea, a misconception about abortion, that the type of person who gets an abortion is like this very irresponsible, very vulnerable teenager who got pregnant by mistake. And I think that was supposed to be a thing that the pro-choice movement did because it makes the person getting the abortion more sympathetic, right? Because she wasn't trying to get pregnant and so on. It's supposed to be an unfortunate thing. You're supposed to kind of pity her to some extent, right? But that's not true statistically. Statistically, a lot of the women who get abortions, most of them, already have children. So that's a very different picture from the teenager who got pregnant by mistake from her boyfriend or what have you. The mother who already has multiple children and doesn't know if she can afford to carry a child to term and then raise it financially, that's a different conversation. And that's a conversation of loosening moral responsibility. Now we're not talking about, it's definitely going to threaten her physical health. Now we're not talking about the fetus isn't a real person deserving of moral consideration. Now we're talking about finances. We're talking about it's hard to carry a child to term. We're talking about it's too much of a weight to expect somebody who already has multiple children to be able to handle that financially, to be able to handle that obligation. In other words, now we're alleviating moral responsibility from the situation. Now we're having the real conversation. I believe this in general. I believe this as a general principle that we should be alleviating this moral responsibility and working towards a society that makes it easier to do the types of things we want to do without judging people for not doing things that are hard. Controversial take. I think most people don't do things that are hard. I think we don't. I don't think it matters whether we should or not. I think we just don't. You can say you want more money, you should work harder. But that's hard, so a lot of people aren't gonna. You can say you want to be more fit, then you just gotta hit that gym 7 days a week. You gotta sacrifice your love of good tasting foods and acclimate yourself towards salad. But most people won't do that because it's hard. It's as simple as that. And that's not wrong. It's not wrong for human beings to have limits and to be vulnerable and to have only so much they can take emotionally and in terms of stress. There's only so much responsibility a person can realistically take on. And so to talk about moral responsibility in these terms of it either is a moral responsibility or it isn't, like this binary thing, the way most ethics does, is broken. We should be talking about, is it hard or not? And the degrees of hardness should shape our opinions. So let's move to the left. The left cares about things like ethical consumerism. They care about things like, who do you associate with? They care about things like I'll do ethical consumerism on a deeper level, right? Veganism. They care about saving the planet. They care about, are you going zero waste? Are you riding your bike to work instead of driving? You know, is every single minute of your life consumed by an all-encompassing fear that every tiny action you do creates CO2? Because according to a lot of people on the left, if it's not, you suck. Or well, actually, let me moderate that a little bit. For whatever reason, most people, even in these like ethical consumerism, these sort of spaces, they're not vegan, and they don't bike to work, or they're not zero waste. So they don't take on the really, really hard moral responsibilities. They just take on the ones that are kind of easy for them. Not playing the new Harry Potter game because J.K. Rowling is transphobic. Something like that, right? That's probably pretty easy for most people, unless you're a huge Harry Potter fan, right? It's probably pretty easy. Maybe you already didn't drink at Starbucks or eat hummus, and now you're getting mad at people on the internet for drinking Starbucks and eating hummus because of the BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction movement. Both of those things are a part of a boycott. That is an aspect, that's probably where most of the left lives, is in this territory where they don't fully adhere to their own principles, because again, they're not vegan, they don't bike to work, they're not zero waste, but they still confidently enforce those same moral principles on everybody else. So there's a hypocrisy argument I could make, but that's not enough. No one is convinced by hypocrisy. No one is convinced by hypocrisy anymore. All that hypocrisy does makes them rationalize their own hypocrisy. Oh, well, being vegan kills more animals because of the voles. Well, won't someone think of the voles in the tofu fields? Or something like that. They'll come up with some or another cope that rationalizes why the specific ethical things they don't do, they don't have to. Recently, I got a little bit into it with a lady on Facebook, as we all do these days, unfortunately, because this lady on Facebook was very, very... Where was I? Oh yeah, beef with Facebook stranger. Yeah, suffice it to say, this woman was pro-ethical consumerism, and I wasn't a big fan, and I tried to sort of calmly and insightfully talk about the limits of personal responsibility and how I don't think we should be making big asks of people. I think people have enough on their plates in life, and we shouldn't be demanding more from people. We should be trying to meet people where they're at and give to people. That should be the approach. Politics should be about making life easier for the average person, not about creating a bunch of demands for how the average person can set their own interests aside for the cause. The cause should be approaching them and telling them what it can do for them, not what they can do for it. That's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, but in reverse. And in reverse, the opposite. Ask not what you can do for your fucking revolution or whatever. Ask what your revolution can do for you. And of course she didn't like that, and she was just like, oh, boo-hoo, it's so hard to go off of social media. Oh, I like Twitter. Twitter is fun for me. That's what all of them do. That's what all of it is. Vegans will say, oh, well, it tastes good, so murder's okay. Pro-lifers will say, oh, well, it's really hard to afford another child. That's why I'm murdering babies, and it's fine. They all have this disdain towards forgiveness of how hard things are. And I don't. I, across the board, don't. I would like to free you of all of that hard stuff. That's what I would like to do. Everybody else wants to create an impossible ideal and then force you, to some degree, to strive towards it. Yeah. That's one of a number of reasons why I don't like ethical consumerism. That's really the secret conceit of the video here.